It came.
And the battle for Britain is on.
30 enemy aircraft over the channel, flying due west.
Over southern England, the Royal Air Force takes on the might of the German Luftwaffe. Among the pilots is Sergeant Chu Teng Soon from Singapore. RAF planes take to the skies to confront a group of German bombers. Chu spies a weakness in the formation and blasts his enemy out of the skies. Two years later, Chu's caught in a dogfight over the English Channel. This time, his plane is shot to pieces, never to be seen again. Chu was never honoured for his service, his heroic deeds all but forgotten. But he's not alone.
When war broke out in Europe and Britain was fighting alone, it was the empire that was in some ways propping up Britain.
The contribution of people who came from countries that are now in the Commonwealth was absolutely enormous. Something like 5 million people saw active service.
I think that World War II is a very transnational thing, and of course, as people came to fight in Singapore, there were also people from Singapore going out to fight in other theatres of war.
The legacy of Singapore's harrowing occupation still resonates today. But what of Singaporeans who fought on battlefields, thousands of miles from home?
But there were very few of them, and these are stories that we Singaporeans should not forget.
They have been somewhat lost or overlooked in parts of a larger narrative.
And I think we owe it to them, to their families, to remember what they did.
This is the story of 4 extraordinary individuals from Singapore who found themselves in far-flung theatres of war.
Well, let's see. We have some video footage.
Lee Hansen now lives in the United States, but she often thinks of her homeland and of her late grandfather, Tan Kei Hai.
I guess the big memory as a kid was my grandfather would be sitting and his feet would be up, you know, relaxing, and then on his right toe was this huge bump. One day I asked my dad, so what's the deal with the bump? Yeah, my dad was like, that's a bullet that he never removed from the war. We know for a fact that he probably was the only Chinese pilot that took part in the D-Day invasions. So it is unique not just for Singapore, but unique for all of Asia. This is D-Day, June 6th. His 2 World War II logbooks and all the flying that he did afterwards was still recorded, and that gave me a lot of information to do the research.
Lee wants to keep her grandfather's legacy alive for her 3 children, including youngest son, Trey.
My recollection of Charlie Chan, who was always smiling. He tried to get me to land, and he decided I couldn't land, so he had to do an emergency plot.
Okay.
It was a fascinating enough story.
So this is when you started flying Mustang?
Yes. And I was like, you know, the kids ought to know the story, and I would love to do something so that they had a coherent picture of what actually happened. Yeah, let me show you the other logbook, because this is a little different.
So what's the second one? Is the second one from, like, after he came back?
Tan Kei Hai was born in 1914 into a wealthy, Straits Chinese family. After attending St Andrew's School, he worked for Malayan Motors. Tan developed a passion for planes, spending his free time at the Royal Singapore Flying Club.
He was the top salesman in Malayan Motors. That was not enough for him. He was more ambitious, and that was what motivated him to train to be a pilot.
But this idyllic life was not to last. After the fall of France in 1940, Tan decided to use his flying skills for a higher purpose. He enlisted with the Royal Air Force.
I think he saw the war as an opportunity to contribute to something that he believed in.
Some communities like the Straits Chinese and the Ceylon Tamils saw their own identities as being linked to the British Empire. Enlisting in the military was seen as something someone would do to express their duty to the British Empire.
The RAF wanted to recruit young, unattached men. Most of the recruits were like 17, 18, 19, 20. He was 26. He was also married with 2 children. And obviously, this is a hazardous job. He had badgered my grandmother to the point where she just said, I'll sign the paperwork. They needed to sign up from her, I think, for him to be able to sign up.
Tan was duly recruited, making history as the first Chinese man to join the RAF training school in Singapore. Just a few months later, he was on a ship bound for Canada. But when Singapore suddenly fell to the Japanese, Tan's hopes of returning to his family were shattered.
He didn't know what was going on with them. They didn't know what was going on with him. There was this zero news blackout, which to me is an incredible thing. You just have to keep going, keep moving forward.
After training in Canada and England, Tan's first combat mission was in North Africa.
They learned to really admire his skill in flying, and so he just became one of the boys. The fact they had to rely on each other for life and death, I think that creates a bond that doesn't even need to be really said.
Over in Italy, Tan flew dangerously low to draw out enemy fire, thus giving away their defensive positions.
He was a daredevil, and he would fly in from the angle of the sun, like with the sun behind him, so that the gunners couldn't see him. So as he was taking out all these guns, he would calculate how much it cost the Germans, and he'd be just tallying it up,
Tan gained a formidable reputation and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross.
He was one of the few pilots who were Chinese in the Royal Air Force. So, yeah, you can see that it is highly unusual, actually.
To win a DFC meant that you had done something of extraordinary gallantry and self-sacrifice in combat in the face of the enemy, and that would speak for itself no matter where in the empire you were from. He was a war hero, full stop.
By 1944, Tan was preparing for a mission like no other. The greatest amphibious operation in world history. D-Day.
The British fired at fortified houses as they came in, smashing many a sniper's nest and observation post.
D-Day was a turning point in the sense that the Allies were now facing the Nazis in France. Throughout the years when the Allies were facing the Germans in Italy and North Africa, these were regarded as kind of peripheral, but to actually get into France meant that Germany was quite close, so the end was near.
As Allied troops stormed the beaches, Tan flew reconnaissance missions over Normandy, blasting German ground forces at every opportunity.
We were obviously proud that he had been part of the landing, that he had saved a lot of lives by providing protective cover, strafing the machine guns and the cannons that the Germans had built along the coast.
Hitler's fortress had been cracked. The great gamble had been won, having accomplished what many European military leaders believed never could be done, a cross-channel invasion.
Tan was now a deadly combat pilot, but his luck was running out. Tan's flying alongside another P-51 Mustang after completing a mission near Paris. As the sun sets, the pair head back to base. But bearing down on them are 8 German fighters. Tan turns to face the enemy, but he takes a barrage of bullets. Part of his starboard wing rips off, and the aircraft lurches into a terminal spin. And as he spirals downwards, Tan stares death in the face. RAF pilot Tan Hai is attacked by German fighters. They blast his wing off, and he plunges from the sky. Tan rips off the hood, and he's flung out, just 200 feet above the ground. His parachute opens, but it doesn't fit his smaller frame. He hangs out face down and lands with a thud.
I tried to get up, but I felt a sharp pain on my left side. Blood was dripping from my nose and mouth, and my heart was thumping hard and fast.
At that time, he made a record because he was shot down at a low altitude. And up to that point in time, nobody else had survived jumping out of an aircraft at that height.
So he lands, he's bloody. He had injured himself, he had broken 3 ribs, but nothing more serious than that.
Tan picks himself up and races out of the field. He approaches a farmhouse, but he's turned away. At another home, a couple seem to take pity. They give him fresh clothes and let him rest in their barn. But they're not to be trusted. At sunrise, he's seized by German soldiers. Tan's marched off to a prisoner of war camp in Germany, Stalag Luft 3.
Would he have been discouraged? I think he was fairly good at just picking himself up and dealing with the situation, just keep going, keep going.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, another serviceman from Singapore languishes in captivity. Jimmy Chu's imprisoned in a POW camp in Java. This is a place of no hope and no mercy.
We were ordered to run until we collapsed. They would hit you and make you stand facing the sun until you passed out.
I did ask my grandfather, did he ever think that he would leave the camp one day? He answered me no. He thought he was going to die there without family, without ever falling in love, without having his own family. He saw death everywhere, every day, people suffering.
If you were a prisoner of war of the Japanese, then you were in a pretty precarious position. Worse, of course, if you were a Chinese prisoner of war of the Japanese. We have no idea what the survival rate was, but it wasn't good.
Chu is punished by the Japanese guards for working for the British in Singapore. And as he takes their beatings, he thinks of life before this nightmare. As war raged across Europe, 17-year-old Chu enlisted with the Royal Air Force in Singapore.
His father retired at the age of 40-something at that time. As the eldest, he was very responsible to take care of his parents, obviously, and the younger siblings. And that was why, after graduation, he joined the very stable job, he said, which is the British Armed Forces.
Jimmy Chu underwent the technical training and then was deployed to SF-51's maintenance unit. And because of the extensive maintenance work they had to do, the RAF recruit locals, train them to service and repair aircraft.
After training, Chu was posted as a technician to RAF Seletar.
The point of Seletar was that aircraft which were designed to carry out reconnaissance and surveillance missions at sea or strike missions at sea would operate from.
Chu came from an Anglo-centric family, and he communicated well with British officers.
Britain is the best in the world, and we are lucky to be part of them. That is what my father taught me. But in Seletar, we were considered second-class servicemen. When we tried to enter the pool, a service policeman said, "You cannot swim here. This is for British people only." We were so disciplined, we just left.
The British military is very staunch in tradition and hierarchy. It is not surprising that there could be a certain level of difference in treatment between the European servicemen as compared to the local servicemen. So what Jimmy Chu experienced, I think it is not uncommon. I guess at that point in time, they do feel disappointed.
This discrimination became a way of life for Chu, but he was about to face an even greater challenge. As Singapore slept, Japanese bombs fell from the skies. After the smoke cleared, 61 lay dead. On the same day, Japanese troops marched into Thailand and northern Malaya. And within 70 days came the unthinkable.
If you had the thinking that Singapore was impregnable, then of course you'd be shocked because you have this myth that with the big guns, with the naval base in place, then there is no way that we could fall.
The people of Singapore were not prepared for the fall of Singapore. I was a little boy. I remember the period of insecurity because the Japanese military decided the way to overall the population is by a reign of terror. It was a dark chapter.
The last few days of Singapore were horrific, with death and destruction all around you.
Amongst this chaos, Chu was discharged from RAF Seletar. He slept on the roadside and grew hungry. But as an aircraft technician, he had valuable skills. So Chu joined the Royal Australian Air Force and boarded one of the last ships out of Singapore.
He had to go, and that was part of his service. That's what soldiers do. I did ask him, was he frightened he might not see his family again? He said he didn't want to think about it, and yes.
After leaving Singapore, 10 bombers attacked our ship. A few of us were killed, but we managed to reach Tanjong Priok the next day.
But days after arriving in Java, Chu's escape to Australia was over. He was captured by the Japanese and would spend nearly 4 years in a brutal POW camp. Chu's war was now about survival. But for others, the battle was only just beginning.
When it was not my watch, I would go up for some air. There I would see wooden beams, shoes, sometimes a body float by. Other times, we would pass by a ship about to slip under the sea. But after a while, I learned to look past these things.
Lee Kim Hock grew up in 1930s Singapore. He came from a large, impoverished family, abandoned by their father. To make ends meet, teenage Lee worked as a coolie. The job was backbreaking, but it opened his eyes to life beyond the harbour.
In those days, this was one of the few areas of work in Singapore where you could have contact with foreigners. And you know, sailors are very gregarious, and they will bring stories of what life was like beyond the horizon. So that sparked the interest. Maybe I could just get on board this ship, you know, a new world could await me.
Lee's prayers were answered when the SS Nestor powered into harbour. He wrangled a place on board and said goodbye to Singapore.
For Kim Hock to have this opportunity to take the place of somebody who had jumped ship, I think it must have filled him with quite a bit of excitement, you know. He thought maybe he had struck a lottery.
Out at sea, he graduated from deckhand to engine room worker.
Working on a ship, or as a coolie, it was the same. What was important was that I was able to see the world. I went to Havana, Cape Town, London, New York. They became like homes to me. Not many people those days got out of Malaya, so I was happy.
Lee travelled the world, but trouble was brewing in Europe that would change everything.
On September the 1st, 1939, the Nazi army smashed into Poland.
After Hitler marched on Poland, Britain and France declared war on Germany. For 6 months, there was little fighting on land. But out at sea, the British and German navies clashed in the Battle of the Atlantic.
The Germans opened unrestricted submarine warfare.
German warships and submarines known as U-boats hunted down Allied vessels.
They were well equipped, and the men in them were well coordinated by a determined and aggressive force. And for a while there, they were a genuine threat to the ability of the Western Allies to keep pushing forward against the Germans.
For safety in numbers, the Allies formed convoys of merchant ships and naval escorts, connecting North America with Great Britain.
The convoys are important because for the British, this is a vital access point. This is a way that they can move goods, people and supplies using the waters. So one of the aims with the U-boats was to completely disrupt this, and they do it very successfully.
When you're in the middle of the ocean, beyond the range of aircraft, meant that a different kind of warfare would take place. You know, battles fought on the water itself, under the water, and above the water. And it cannot be underestimated, the danger that the U-boats pose.
In 10 months, the Allies lost over 500 ships. With each of these sinkings went down tons of desperately needed supplies for the fighting front.
The Allies started to take dangerously high losses. It's getting pretty tough enough that in March 1941, Prime Minister Churchill said, "The Battle of the Atlantic is top priority. Let's focus everything have on it. We've got to win it once and for all."
With the sea war raging, Lee considered returning to the safety of British-held Singapore. But he also felt a strong sense of duty.
I thought I would be abandoning the merchant navy when it needed people like me the most. We were civilians, but we were also important for the war effort. Without us, Britain would be defeated. So I stayed.
Lee was drafted onto a new ship and embarked on his first Atlantic crossing.
Some of the crew couldn't take the stress. They became convinced the ship was about to be attacked and leapt into the sea, crazy from fear. Some were picked up. Others were never seen again.
I think crossing the Atlantic was really such a nerve-wracking experience because at any point you may expect an attack from a U-boat. So it would be extremely trying in terms of keeping your morale up when you really were facing very grave danger.
Despite these perils, Lee completed his first crossing. But he was navigating treacherous waters, and death was never far away. Lee is part of a new convoy crossing the Atlantic. It's a cool night, and he takes a break on deck. But beneath the surface, hunters prowl.
Suddenly, there was an explosion from the ship on our starboard side. Its back broke, and it went down with the bow and stern in the air. It was so quick, and there was no time to do anything.
Lee watches the ship sink, taking men and machinery to a watery grave. The convoy presses on, but the attacks continue. By the time they arrive into Liverpool, 8 more ships have been lost. Despite these grave dangers, Lee keeps traveling across the Atlantic, determined to be on the winning side of this war. But far from these treacherous waters, another hero from Singapore remains trapped behind enemy lines. POW camp Stalag Luft 3 is deep in German territory. And Tan Khe Hai has been captive here for 6 months.
You read accounts of that, towards the end of the war, conditions in the camp got worse and worse because the German population was starving, So I think they were pretty much kept alive by minimum rations from the Germans and Red Cross parcels.
But change is coming. With Soviet troops advancing from the east, the camp is evacuated.
The Germans tried to evacuate them to get away as the Russian army closed in, and a large number of Allied POWs died in that process, not necessarily massacred or murdered. They just died because it was winter and this was a traumatic move.
Tan is packed onto a train with other POWs, destined for a new camp in Bavaria. But in the fear and confusion, he leaps off the train and escapes into a forest.
There was so much chaos when he jumped out of the train. It was knowledge that the Allies were moving. He decided to take his chances. I'll jump off the train and see what I find. And at that point, there's really no benefit to staying prisoner of war because the food in the camp was getting worse and worse and worse as the German supply lines shrunk.
In the bitter cold, Tan desperately searches for food. After 3 sleepless nights, he's rescued by American troops.
Food was, of course, very scarce and of poor quality. And when he rejoined his unit, his squadron, he was given a piece of plain white bread and it never tasted so good.
Just a few months later, Tan is back flying missions for the RAF. And as he soars in the skies over Europe, another airborne hero is fighting for freedom in Asia.
Off we go in the wild blue yonder, up and high into the sky. Da 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 da. La, la, la. I forgot all the words. I'm Captain Ho Weng Toh, and I'm 100 years old, and very proud to be a Singaporean. I'm a member of the Flying Tiger. I'm now the only survivor in this part of the world.
Hours after the US Pacific Fleet was smashed at Pearl Harbor and the first bombs fell on Singapore, over 50,000 Japanese troops crossed the border into Hong Kong. As they marched on the colony, Japanese bombers attacked Hong Kong's airport. 21-year-old student Ho Weng Toh witnessed the carnage.
I was studying my exam, and to my surprise, I saw Japanese aircraft bombing Kai-Tak. I was very shocked. The whole world just collapsed on me.
Nippon attack continues at the sound of bursting shrapnel and...
The Battle of Hong Kong raged for 18 days, and when the colony fell, a brutal new era of Japanese rule began.
I witnessed lots of atrocities. I could see them tying all these people at low tide, so that as the tide goes up, these people will be drowned. It is for the population of Hong Kong to see. If you do something wrong, that is what you have to pay for.
It means the dawn of a new era.
They became conquerors, not liberators, and they did not treat the locals as co-equals, but as people that they now rule.
If you came into the crosshairs of the Japanese military, you probably died. It was a good place to get out of, for sure, if you at all could.
It was very dangerous, very fearful. So I have to leave Hong Kong for somewhere.
Under the cover of darkness, Ho met with local smugglers. He boarded a truck with fellow fugitives and began a daring escape to free China. The group bypassed sentries, evaded enemy spies, outsmarted Japanese soldiers, and paid off countryside bandits.
We have informers from mainland China to guide us in, because on our own we could not do it.
Ho arrived into the safety of free China, but he was now destitute.
My resources were all very limited. My budget was only on soya beans and tangerines. That's how I survived. Suddenly, I saw a newspaper. They're looking for pilots, you know. My friends around me said, "You're crazy. Look at you. You don't have a very good build to be a pilot." I said, "Doesn't matter. I've nothing to lose."
During that period of time, many of the young Chinese, having seen the atrocity of the Japanese, what the Chinese government did was they put up advertisement for airmen to join the Chinese Air Force, and the hatred against the Japanese motivate many of the Chinese youth to join this scheme.
Ho duly enlisted as a trainee pilot for the Chinese Air Force.
Finally, it's graduation day. Proud? You bet.
Huh?
He wants to know where are you in this one.
What did he say?
This picture. Where are you in this picture?
Here. What?
No.
It doesn't look like me,
Very smart looking. So when I was young, he hardly spoke or told us anything about his war years in China. It was only when I was around 5 or 6 years old that I found a little box. And in it contained his service ribbons or service medals, you know. I'm very proud of the fact that he has done so much. He's definitely my hero. He's taught me many, many things, in life.
Flight training took Ho from India to the United States.
And every day these GIs from Shanghai, Nanking, and Hankow bone up on our finest, most modern equipment. They come overseas to train and go home to fight. Hiya, Shang. Hello, Lynn. You can't wear out these guys. They fly the clock around, piling up hours, experience, and skill.
They spend no time. They start our flying training. They call it 1 miracle a year. All this training is condensed from 3 years to 1 year.
Now a fully fledged pilot, Ho travelled back to China to join the Chinese-American Composite Wing, or CACW, known as the Flying Tigers. Ho was assigned to the B-25 bomber.
The CACW was an attempt by the Chinese government with the help of the Americans to rejuvenate the Chinese Air Force.
And to the aid of China came volunteers from other lands.
And the CACW has a unique arrangement whereby the group commander, the squadron commanders are American, but all their deputies are Chinese. The pilots, the air crew, the ground maintenance personnel, they are both Chinese and Americans as well.
Young Chinese, many of them trained on the fields of Arizona, New Mexico, California, fly and fight beside their American comrades.
Ho was now combat ready, but time was running out. The Japanese were dominating the war in Asia, occupying northern China and marching on the south.
The first mission was cancelled. Last minute, the clouds were too low, and no point going to the target you can't see. Very disappointed, because here I am, after all the training, but it's okay. Not every mission is smooth, you know.
Two B-25 bombers power through the skies. Their mission? To take out enemy targets across southern China. They engage a cluster of Japanese cavalry, taking turns to fire on them with machine guns. Ho is flying so low that he can see the fear in their eyes.
Once we spotted them, they ducked. So we went out very low. I could see all the soldiers, all disarray. Now you're going to open up your guns. Then after that, you'll come back to see the damage that we have done. I said, this is for all the atrocities in Hong Kong. People suffer so much. You come back with a feeling you kill a lot of people. I know it's very cruel, but that's part and parcel of the war. Either they kill me or I kill them.
Ho completed 18 missions against the Japanese, with his squadron bombing warehouses, railway lines, and sea lanes. But in August 1945, everything changed.
One atomic bomb did this to a city and its people.
I didn't expect these two bombs that could happen like that. The war shortened very much, very fast. I survived when I lost so many friends.
As the fog of war cleared, the world counted the terrible cost. And then life moved on.
What does the story mean to the younger generation of Singaporeans? For me, the desire was to preserve a piece of family memory. And I felt it was important for my children so that they can have a coherent story of actually what happened. This particular experience of the war for my grandfather, Tan Kei Hai, was very formative. I would like people to remember him as someone who made courageous choices in the face of limited options And, you know, in the end, it all came together and led him to do things that were really outrageously brave. That, I think, is a useful takeaway for anyone. You just keep putting your next foot forward and keep going.
Tan Khe Hai helped establish the Malayan Auxiliary Air Force, the forerunner to the Malaysian and Singapore Air Forces. As wing commander, he trained Singapore's next generation of pilots. In a twist of fate, one of Tan's recruits was RAF technician and former POW Jimmy Chu. He rose to the rank of squadron leader.
It was the what do you do after the war that really made him who he is. He thought that he would never know happiness, and he did. He had children, he had grandchildren who loved him so much.
The courage, the bravery, the resilience, the resolution to come back and pick up your old life from where you were, I think that's pretty heroic.
Lee Kim Hock continued life as a sailor and lived out his final days in Liverpool, England. Captain Ho Weng Toh flew for Malayan Airways, which later became Singapore Airlines. He retired in 1980.
To be able to live to 100 is already not simple. I think a lot about the war years. Can't help it. Life has to go on. It's only how you make it. You have to take chances. This is life. All of us have a life to live.